and I see things differently, and I do stand by that. It was really cool for me to realize that I am connected enough to my authenticity to know what I stand for. And, and I'm always open to growth.
Your dreams will always require your healing, and you need to know that in order to move forward. If you feel stuck in your creativity, your art, your business, or your life, then it's essential to understand that you are being asked to heal what's in the way of you creating what you dream about. This podcast is all about the relationship between your emotional health and your creativity. I'm Courtney Lancaster, and this is the Heal Create podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Heal Create podcast. Hi guys. I didn't have to think too hard about what I wanted to talk about this week because of an experience that I had recently that I think is so universal to creatives. And it was just such a classic situation that I wanted to go into detail about how I navigated it and hopefully bring a little bit of relief that a situation like this is actually survivable. I talked about this on my Instagram, so if you guys have been following along with Heal Create, you might have seen me mention it, but basically, I want to talk about being judged and being judged in your authenticity. So I was talking to a friend recently and we were joking about just long histories of, wanting people to like you. And just, I think as a woman, that's such a common thing that we experience is this like just feeling of even, shape-shifting, people-pleasing, betraying ourselves and our authenticity in order for people to like us. And it's so interesting because Brene Brown talks about how, like, if you betray yourself, you try and become what you want, people to be, and they like you, then you have to keep up that, facade. You have to stay in that unnatural shape in order for them to continue connecting to you and liking you. But if they don't like you, well, then you double lose because not only do you feel that sting of rejection, you also have betrayed yourself to try and, be what they wanted. So the best thing that we can do, of course, this is the journey of Heal Create. This is, resolving trauma. This is creating your dreams. Like it all has to do with really knowing and understanding your authentic self and becoming and embodying and stepping into your authenticity. That is the goal. That's the goal of integration, as we're being kind and compassionate to these parts, all these different parts of us that make up the whole of who we are. It's bringing them all in and really understanding our adult self and then trying, and sometimes failing, but trying slowly to increase our capacity to be that person out in the world. And it is the hero's journey, the heroine's journey. It's the goal of all of this work. And so a big hindrance to that work, especially for creatives that are people that identify as creatives. I've said this before, but they're different from those that kind of are following maybe a clearer path vocationally, or, maybe they are not in the minority as far as their identity goes. And there might be a little bit more clarity around who they're trying to be. So for creatives, that's usually not the case. We're on totally uncharted territory. There is no map for this. And we have, for so many of us that have any kind of disconnection wounds from childhood or big capital T trauma, we have to go on the journey of discovering, well, who is our authentic self? And when we're on that journey, what we want to pay attention to, I've talked about this before, is who inspires us? Who do we find that we are when we are, in a regulated state of hope and joy and inspiration and connection? Who is that version of us? And what do we want to create when we're in that space? And so the hindrance is like, well, what if, I really become who I truly am and people don't like it? Or what if the things that I create people don't like? And the answer to that is always well, then it's not for them. There's 8 billion people in the world. So you are going to find people that you, in your authenticity, connect with. There's so many people, and we're made for connection. And it does take trust, and it feels a little risky, especially if you've been a people pleaser for so long, to trust that when you step into your authenticity that you will find people that you connect with. But it is what happens. And ultimately, knowing that you love you is just the most free. I mean, it's hard, honestly, not to connect to people when you feel just lit up from within. Truly. Like, have you ever had a great day and you just like want to be best friends with the barista? Is that just me? Or you're just like the cashier at the grocery store. You're like, oh my gosh, how are you? I mean, it's hard not to connect to the world when you are in your true authentic self. So that fear around like, what if people don't like me? Or what if I'm judged? Or what if I get rejected? It happens, I think, a lot less than it feels like it might when you are in sort of self-protective hiding space. However, it does happen sometimes. And the truth is that you can only be as visible, especially for creatives that want to be really visible. That's certainly always been a desire of mine, to have a platform, to be visible, to perform, all a part of my authentic self. You can only step into that as much as you're willing to really feel the pain of rejection. And I know that sounds like bad news, but it's actually the best news. Because when you can cultivate the capacity to be able to handle that level of pain and all of the somatic experiences that go along with it, which I'll talk about a little bit later, then there's really nothing to be afraid of. I know creatives, artists, influencers who have experienced such profound rejection that they like shut down all the things that they were building and then questioned if they were supposed to build it at all. And I've always come back around to like, once that wound is healed and they realize that the judgment actually has nothing to do with who they are, because judgment is always the projection of unhealed parts of other people onto them. Then they realize like, oh yeah, okay, I'm ready to rebuild. I'm ready to show up again in the world. It really is like tending to that wound of past rejection, healing those younger parts that did not have somebody to talk to about maybe being bullied, maybe being gossiped about, maybe being pushed out of a group or rejected, which is all really terrifying stuff when you're a kid. Maybe they didn't have anybody to talk to and it wasn't resolved and there was no apologies and there was no reconnection, reestablishing of connection. There was no safe place to come home to at the end of the day after a rough day with your peers that rejected you. Whatever the fear may be or the memories may be around being rejected, being judged, being ridiculed, criticized, we actually can go back and we want to learn to remember what those painful memories feel like, maybe in a supportive container with like, a coach or counselor. And then we want to really have compassion on those parts of us and let us give those parts of us what we didn't have, which is maybe someone to talk to, someone to listen, a hug, connection. And that's all the inner child work that you can do. And then once you begin to resolve some of those wounds, then we have a different map in our head of what judgment feels like. So that had been a lot of the work that I had done, really deeply loving every part of myself, going back to all of those memories where I felt, really deeply wounded, tending to those. So as this has all been happening, as is the case when we are healing, I've been creating some really, really cool things along with this podcast, just a successful coaching business and speaking at different groups, doing some group coaching and creating some digital products, really kind of building this business that supports me financially and creatively, as well as supports other people and helps other people and kind of gets this message of hope and encouragement and education out into the world. And it's been really beautiful, as well as stepping into music and some of the like real passion projects that I've always had. So it's been really cool. And, healing is always expand and contract. So like you take a step forward and you're like, yeah, this feels really good. This is what I want to do. And then you might have waves of anxiety. So this has been, 5 years of my life now of just expand and contract. And every time you expand into something bigger and bigger. And I think one of my fears has been this, just like I said, the fear that every creative kind of shares. And it's, what if I'm judged? I haven't actually been outwardly, explicitly judged. I've had family members, as I've, kind of shifted beliefs or decided to do different things, maybe express concern, but nobody's like outwardly shamed me for anything that I've done. It's happened to me twice this year in really, really profound ways. And the one that I want to talk about today is something that happened when I went on a podcast recently. So as you know, I'm a Christian, and I haven't quite talked about deconstruction on this podcast yet, but you can probably tell if you followed me for this long, you know that I have a lot of thoughts about Jesus, I could tell you lots of stories about what it means to me, about how I was a worship leader my whole entire life, raised in church my whole life. And then in my healing journey, ended up really deconstructing and pulling apart my own faith in the religion of Christianity, and then thinking and rethinking about what my relationship to Jesus was now, ended up reconstructing. And it's a big part of my life. And I tend to work with people. The people that find me tend to be the ones that are questioning and healing unhelpful beliefs about Christianity and God, and maybe are, taking a step back from Christianity or from, spirituality, and trying to figure out where they stand. And it's just something that I love. I love that part of my journey, as painful and as difficult as it was. I'm so glad that I walked through that. So I was invited onto a podcast recently to talk about some of this and talk about my deconstruction journey, my journey as a worship leader, some of the things I took apart, some of the questions that I asked. And it was a really fun experience. It was super fun. Just that is my authenticity. And at this point, if you have been raised in Christianity your entire life, having alternative or even open, asking questions, any kind of different beliefs around the standard evangelical Western most popular view of God and Christianity is terrifying. It is terrifying. I know somebody's listening right now that's shaking their head like, yes, that would be terrifying. It is, because it's incredibly difficult to put new ideas out into the world. Your whole brain and body is wired for survival, and survival, number one, means connection. And so without a connection to yourself, the next best thing is a deep connection to your tribe, a tribal survival initiative, from your nervous system, from your body. And to have different ideas is actually a really big threat to your survival, because it means it could take you away from your tribe. So it takes a lot of internal connection to God and to self in order to, if you are a leader or if you have, different thoughts than the tribe you grew up with, to put them out into the world. So I have really cultivated a lot of safety within, but I did this podcast and I just told my story. And there was one part where they had asked me, what song would you not lead in a church service? And I said I would not lead Reckless Love. Maybe not for the reason that you think. I know Reckless Love is actually already kind of controversial, because the reckless part, that part doesn't bother me at all. The part that I don't like, and I was basically using Reckless Love as an example of the kind of song that I wouldn't lead. The reason why I wouldn't lead that is because I would never say, oh, the overwhelming love of God, I don't deserve it. I would never say that. I would never lead other people to say that, because what that does to the human brain, to rehearse that idea that you might not deserve the love of God, is not what a beloved child would actually say about their loving parent. And I think what I've learned now about Christianity and the beautiful connection that we have to God is that we get to walk around this earth like the most beloved children of God. And there, I believe, is not a space or a time to rehearse the idea that we don't deserve the love of God. As a matter of fact, it's a shame narrative in Christianity that I think is so wildly unhelpful. And there's a lot of science that there is a lot of science to support that shame narratives in any religion or any systemic belief system is so damaging to the psyche and the body and the brain. And I understand that, I've gotten pushback, of course, about gratitude and about how, well, who are we to think that we would, deserve anything? And I would just challenge that from, if you look at, the fruit of the life and the body of somebody who is healthy, it's a very deep sense of self-worth. And I know that there's different interpretations. I'm just saying, for me personally, I would not lead that song in a church service. Whoa. They posted that clip, that specific clip, which the guys that have this podcast are like really amazing guys from my church. And they weren't trying to like throw me to the wolves or anything, but they posted this clip and there wasn't even that many comments. I think there was like 5 or 6 comments, but they really were the most shockingly shaming comments that I could ever imagine. They were really attacking my character and even my personality and my femininity and my relationship to God. And I think what is interesting was, it was just my opinion. So what I did was I let it sting. They asked, gosh, do you want to take this down? And I was like, hold on, let me just feel this. And I did some somatic practices. So what that means is I noticed, how is this landing in my body? And I noticed, just because I grew up in this faith tradition, so much shame, so much fear, just initially. It's drop in my stomach. I noticed tightness in my chest, that tightness in my throat of fear, real fear. That's how it landed in my body. I just could feel like my shoulders wanted to hunch over. I felt like I wanted to hang my head. And I just witnessed it. I witnessed my body react to these few people saying these really intense things about me. And I breathed through it and I reminded myself that, well, I checked in as I was noticing this in my body. This is, I think, something that is really helpful and important to do as you increase your capacity to show up in the world, is to do an inventory to see if there's any truth to what they've said. And in this case, there might have been some truth, like some shreds of truth. Should I have been more careful about how I said it? Possibly. But I really had to check in about the actual thing that I said and the message that I said, and think about, do I stand behind this? And the answer was, yeah, I do. I really do stand behind this message. And I know that that doesn't always make me popular with Christians, because what I see as shame, they see as gratitude. And I see things differently, and I do stand by that. It was really cool for me to realize that I am connected enough to my authenticity to know what I stand for. And, and I'm always open to growth, and I'm always open to being wrong. And God knows this. And I could look back in 5 years and be like, oh my gosh. But for now, this is really, really something I believe in and I think is important. And the clip was kind of just funny. And I cussed in the clip. That was another issue that these people had. So I had to stand behind that as well and think about, would I have done that differently? Maybe, but I am actually okay with that, because in my authenticity, which I was hanging out with friends on this podcast, yeah, I do cuss sometimes. And I am okay with that. And I do stand by that part of me that people might think is messy or imperfect or dishonoring. That is, as of now, as it stands, a part of my authentic expression in the world. So I had to look at what was true, what do I stand behind? And then I just let it hurt. And I brought comfort to myself and connection to myself, let myself be triggered, think and got the story of why those parts of me are triggered. And I connected to my authentic self, this spirit of mine seated in heavenly places. I connected to the eye contact of God, of Jesus as I know him in my heart, and just the lightness of my relationship with him. And so much of that, those reactions that I had in my body washed away. I reached out to a couple of friends and was like, do I have a blind spot here? Am I missing something? And I have just the most beautiful group of friends that were able to encourage me and help me stand my ground in my place. And again, I do want to say it was actually not so many people. I think it felt like so many people. in my heart, in my body, but it wasn't. It was, I think, like five or six. It was just very, very, very harsh comments. And so when I connected to my friends, just had them laugh with me and then also just send me their compassion, helped me regulate my nervous system enough to say, no, you can keep the clip up. It's okay. And I think what's important to remember, it's easy to say this when you're not being like actively judged by another person, but harder to remember. But the truth is that other people's judgment is not about you. If somebody actively like disagrees with you from a regulated place, it will not feel like judgment. It will not feel like shame. It will feel like a conscious, kind, differing perspective with an openness to learn your perspective. There's a huge, huge difference between somebody that's judging you and shaming you and projecting their unhealed wounds and their fear about themselves onto you, and someone who kindly, from a regulated state, disagrees with you. And that's so important to remember when you're having disagreements or when somebody is trying to bring something up to you from a differing perspective. Noticing where you're at in your nervous system. Am I in my true self? And are they in their true self? Because to me, it is never worth fighting or arguing or trying to convince someone of anything if they're not in a regulated state. I would much rather have these open conversations where we're trying to understand people's perspectives. I heard Hillary McBride talk about waiting 5 seconds before you respond to someone when they have a different perspective, just to let it land, to see, is there any truth here for me? Is there any way that I might not have seen the full picture of my own opinion and am able to see theirs as something that might help me figure out my own or see things differently? That's a completely different experience than trying to convince somebody of your side, which never really works. And the point of that, I think, is always to win and not to connect. And so when it's happening to you, it's a little bit harder to remember that that's what's going on. Oh, you're projecting your unhealed wounds onto me. But when you are regulated, it's actually a really wonderful experience to have somebody disagree with you. It sharpens you. It helps you like think about things more fully. It's really beautiful and different. So separating that these people were not trying to they weren't people that knew me. They weren't people that were really trying to help me or even engaging in a conversation. It was just judgment and shame. Then I was able to let it go and even let it exist out into the world, which was another thing I had to breathe through. So this is, I think, something that is going to happen a lot in my life because I want to be visible. It's going to happen a lot in your life too, because you also want to be visible. If you're listening to this podcast, you have a desire to be seen, or you're supporting someone who has a desire to be seen. And you need to know that judgment follows the need to be seen. And a lot of times if people don't feel safe to be seen, they will judge the people that are. Or on the other side, something to consider is when you are judged, if there is truth there that you need to look at, you can handle that too. Either way, if they're projecting unhealed wounds, you can always come back to your regulated self and let them go. Feel what you need to feel. Help your body process that, crying, movement, connection to others. Come back to your regulated state and you can let it go. And you can learn. You can learn if from them if there's real truth you need to consider there too. So I was actually really grateful that this happened to me. I was grateful that I walked through this because it was just such a tangible example of the thing that I had been afraid of happening. And to see we can survive this. We really can. When you know that you'll be okay no matter what, you are safe. You are really, really safe to step into your authenticity no matter what. I know, but it's true. Guys, it really is safe to step into your authentic self. It's safe to be judged. It's safe to be ridiculed, criticized, even shamed when you know that you know who you are and you have a deep interconnection to God and self and hopefully connected to others that can see you and love you and know you as well. you will find more and more space to step into your authentic self. So if you have any questions about this is something I almost wish I could just have a conversation with all of you guys about because I think we all have examples of this and stories and need to normalize it and need to learn how to move through it, which is something that I'm doing this year. It's not the first time this has happened this year, but it was a good thing to almost study as it was happening. So I hope that you were, encouraged or maybe just got to know me a little bit better. I really do hope that you feel like there's evidence, at least from someone else's story, that you can walk through something similar if it happens. And the last thing I want to leave you with is for the two big times that this has happened. The first story I didn't share is a little closer to home. But for the two times that this has happened to me this year, really, really big, big reactions from other people and big reactions in my own nervous system and painful things that have been said. Do you know that about 5,000 times more I've been supported and encouraged and listened to and hugged and loved and laughed with and connected with? Truly. So good news is like Teflon to your nervous system. Bad news is like Velcro. So, if I did a podcast episode on every time somebody really encouraged me and looked me in the eye and was like, you can do this, I would have about 1 million podcast episodes. But that's not what we remember as much as those really deep, painful things. And for good reason. Your body wants to remember those and make a really big impression of painful experiences because it wants to protect you from that ever happening again. So it wants to memorize what happened and make a big deal of it in your nervous system. But the truth is, like really honestly, overwhelmingly, I've been supported the more that I've stepped into my authenticity and my joy and my connection, my inspiration. I've been supported over and over and over and over and over again. And these two times were actually, for all of my human interactions in my life, kind of a drop in the bucket. So just that extra encouragement, that keep paying attention to how often you are connected to and loved and seen. I really do hope that this week you're able to take a step towards whatever it is you're creating on this earth and integrate a little deeper, heal a little deeper so you have more capacity to do so. Hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Heal Create podcast. If you have enjoyed this podcast at all, we would love if you would subscribe, rate it, send it to your friends. That would really help us get this message out, this message of empowering people towards emotionally sustainable creativity. Also, we have a PDF for you. So there's an exercise that I created called inspiration mirroring. And basically, it is for those that are looking to get acquainted with their authentic, truest self, based on the idea that whatever inspires you embodies your potential. And so if you want to get started on that journey today of really understanding who you are at your core, the person that you hope you are, then you can go to the link in my bio on Instagram or go to my website and download that PDF. I think that's all. Have a beautiful day.